Adewale had everything a man could dream of: wealth, power, and a beautiful wife, Kemi. But despite his good fortune, he could never settle his restless heart. Kemi was understanding, always allowing him to wander without complaint. To Adewale, it seemed like the perfect arrangement. He could indulge in his desires, while Kemi remained ever loyal. But what if Kemi's silence wasn't out of love? What if she had an agenda of her own, something much darker than mere acceptance? Adewale would soon discover that the woman he thought he knew was not who she seemed, and the price of his own deceit would come at a cost he never imagined. Adewale was a man of ambition, born into an affluent family in Ibadan. His future was paved with success. He had a well-established business, a large house with a view of the city, and a beautiful wife, Kemi, who was adored by everyone. Kemi was the kind of woman who could make any man feel at ease. She was graceful, kind, and had a smile that could light up a room. But behind that smile, Adewale was starting to notice things he hadn't before, subtle signs that all was not as it seemed. Kemi had always been a patient wife, a wife who seemed to accept Adewale's infidelities without question. He would flirt with other women, disappear for hours, and occasionally bring someone home. But Kemi never once confronted him. She didn't seem to care. She would cook his favorite meals, prepare his clothes, and greet him with the same warm smile every time he returned. It made Adewale feel comfortable, even guilty at times, but he never questioned it. After all, it was the perfect setup, or so he thought. Over time, Adewale's affairs became more frequent, and Kemi's indifference to them became more pronounced. She never seemed jealous or angry. Whenever he came home late from one of his rendezvous, she would simply smile and ask him about his day. There were no accusations, no tears, only the unwavering support that he had come to expect. However, something odd began to happen. The more Kemi gave him the freedom to cheat, the more Adewale found himself in unusual situations. Small things began to add up. The first incident was trivial, a misplaced phone call. Adewale had left his phone on the table while he took a shower. When he came back, he noticed that Kemi was holding the phone, her fingers quickly swiping the screen. It was so brief that Adewale didn't think much of it at first, but there was something in her eyes, something he couldn't quite place. She wasn't angry, but there was a certain coldness in her demeanor that lingered just a moment too long. Then there was the matter of the bank account. One day, Adewale was reviewing their joint finances and he noticed some unusual withdrawals. Not a large sum, but enough to make him raise an eyebrow. When he asked Kemi about it, she brushed it off with a soft smile, saying it was for personal matters and that he didn't need to worry. But worry he did. Weeks passed and Adewale's curiosity grew. He became increasingly aware that his wife was hiding something from him. The strange coldness he saw when she answered his questions, the way she subtly dodged eye contact when he mentioned his affairs, all of it felt like a puzzle he couldn't solve. One evening, Adewale decided to follow Kemi. She had been acting strange for the past few days, and he couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. He kept his distance as Kemi left the house and followed her in his car. She drove to a small, inconspicuous house on the outskirts of Ibadan, a house he had never seen before. Kemi entered without knocking, and after a few minutes, a man walked out from the front door. Adewale's heart sank. This wasn't just any man. It was one of the men he had seen her smile at in their social circles. She had spoken highly of him, calling him a friend during one of their gatherings. But now, here she was, meeting him in secret. Adewale sat in his car, watching. He couldn't believe it. Kemi was having an affair. The realization hit him like a wave. But what shook him even more was the next part. Kemi kissed the man on the lips before walking back into the house. As she disappeared inside, Adewale's mind raced. How could this be? He had always assumed that he was the one enjoying the freedom of infidelity, while Kemi sat at home, patiently waiting for him. But now, it was clear that Kemi had been playing him all along. She wasn't just tolerating his cheating, she was doing it too. The following days were filled with tension. Adewale could no longer ignore the truth. The woman he thought he knew was not the loving, forgiving wife he had imagined. No, she had been the smart one all along. She had let him cheat, let him indulge in his desires, while she had quietly built her own secret life. Adewale began to question everything. Had Kemi known all along about his affairs? Had she allowed him to cheat because she was secretly doing the same? And what was her plan? Was this some kind of game she was playing with him? The hurt and betrayal he felt were sharp, deeper than anything he had ever experienced. One night, as Adewale lay awake in bed, he decided to confront Kemi. He needed answers. He couldn't continue living in this web of lies. When Kemi came into the room, he was already sitting up in bed, his face tense. "Kemi," he said softly, "we need to talk." Kemi's expression remained neutral. Though there was a flicker of something in her eyes, she knew what was coming. "I followed you the other day," Adewale continued. "I saw you with him." For a moment, Kemi didn't respond. She just stared at him, as if waiting for him to say more. Then she sighed, sitting down beside him. "You've always been good at keeping your secrets, Adewale," she said, her voice calm. "But I've been better at keeping mine." Adewale felt his chest tighten. "What are you talking about?" Kemi turned to face him, her eyes dark. "I allowed you to cheat because I wanted you to see what it felt like to be betrayed. I wanted you to know the hurt I felt every time you walked out that door. I've always known about your affairs, Adewale. I just never said anything." Adewale felt his breath catch. "You've been letting me cheat on you on purpose?" Kemi nodded. "Yes, and while you were off having your fun, I was securing my future. Every time you strayed, I was building my whole nest egg. Every time you lied, I grew more powerful. Do you remember the withdrawals you saw in the bank? That was money I was setting aside. For me, for my freedom." Adewale could only stare, unable to form words. His world was unraveling before him. You planned this?" "Yes," Kemi replied, her voice steady. "I allowed you to cheat so that you would think you were in control, but I was the one pulling the strings all along." The room was silent as Adewale processed her words. Every memory of their life together now seemed like a carefully constructed illusion. The love, the laughter, the trust, it had all been a game to her, a game where he had been the fool. "Kemi, why didn't you just leave me?" Adewale asked, his voice broken. "Why let me think I was winning? Why hurt me like this?" Kemi looked at him, her expression unreadable. "Because I wanted you to understand. I wanted you to feel what it was like to be in my shoes, to experience the betrayal, and now you have. You've seen what it feels like to have your trust shattered. You've seen what it feels like to be the fool. And maybe, just maybe, now you can appreciate everything I've done for you." In the days that followed, Adewale was left to reckon with the consequences of his actions. Kemi had outplayed him, not through cruelty, but through patience and strategy. She had given him the space to ruin himself, while she quietly built her independence. Adewale was torn between anger and admiration. How could he have been so blind? How could he have trusted her less than he trusted himself? Yet, in the end, he knew that Kemi had gotten what she wanted. She had used his weaknesses against him, and now she was free. Adewale tried to process everything, but the weight of Kemi's revelation made it impossible for him to see the future in the same light. He couldn't look at her the same way again, knowing she had orchestrated their entire marriage as a silent, long-term chess game. But there was something else within him: regret. He regretted his own careless actions, his constant betrayals, and his inability to see Kemi's quiet strength. After a few weeks of cold distance, Adewale made the decision to leave their home. It wasn't a dramatic exit with accusations and shouting. It was a quiet decision, one born from the realization that their marriage had never been what he thought it was. There was no trust left and no way to rebuild what had been broken. The choice to leave wasn't easy. Adewale still loved Kemi, or at least he thought he did, but the love he felt for her now was tangled with anger and hurt. Could he ever forgive her? Could he ever forget the way she had made him feel like a fool? Kemi, for her part, didn't try to stop him. She had already moved on in her own way. She had built herself up emotionally and financially during their years together, and now she was free to pursue her own life, to take control of her future without being tied to the man who had always seen her as the understanding wife. She knew that Adewale's departure was inevitable. There was no way he could stay after everything had been laid bare. Kemi wasn't heartless. Despite her calculated approach to their marriage, a part of her had loved Adewale, and as he walked away from the life they had built, there was a moment of sadness in her eyes. But that sadness was fleeting. She had won in a way that was beyond what Adewale could ever understand. The divorce proceedings were swift. Kemi had no interest in dragging things out. She had already secured her financial independence and had no intention of remaining tied to a man who could no longer respect her. They had no children, no deep ties that would require much negotiation, so the separation was civil but cold. Kemi walked away with everything she needed: a new lease on life and the satisfaction of knowing that her strategy had succeeded. Adewale, on the other hand, was left to rebuild his life. He had lost the woman who had once been the center of his world, and although he knew he had caused his own downfall, the pain of betrayal still stung. He had never imagined that Kemi would be the one to outsmart him, to turn his own actions back on him. He had thought of her as weak, understanding, patient, but in the end, it was Kemi who had held the power all along.